The heavy, suffocating silence set the courtroom alive. That kind of silent atmosphere makes every cough resound and every shuffle of paper like a clap of thunder. Morning light filtered through tall arched windows, catching dust in golden beams, as if even the sun itself wanted to witness this. About to be, at the center of it all sat Judge Halverson, known for her unshakable composure and razor-sharp sense of justice. With a firm strike of her gavel, the room fell still. "This court is now in session," she declared, her voice carrying the weight of a story far larger than legal arguments. "We are here to hear Brown v. Brown, a civil dispute over property rights, financial misrepresentation, and alleged breach of trust." Her gaze swept across the room, pausing briefly on each face before her. On the plaintiff's side, Christine Brown and Janelle Brown sat together shoulder to shoulder, a quiet demonstration of strength built out of years of shared anger. Christine had a tight jaw, her eyes steady and rebellious, while Janelle held a worn leather binder in her hands, one so battered that it looked like it bore the weight of decades. Just behind them, Meri Brown sat slightly apart, hands folded neatly in her lap, her expression unreadable, the look of someone who had been silent too long and was finally ready to speak. Kody Brown sat across the aisle from her, his back stiff, lips carved into a thin, defiant line. His suit was immaculate, but his eyes told stories of exhaustion, or perhaps fear. Beside him, Robyn sniffled with a tissue clutched at the corners of her eyes, darting glance toward women she once called sisters. This was not a struggle for land or money. It was the untangling of a promise, a covenant once uttered in love, now cut apart by oath. Decades of loyalty, sacrifice, and pent-up resentment had led them here to one room where truth would at last have nowhere left to hide. And with that, as the attorneys rose for their opening remarks, it became clear this was not going to be an ordinary family dispute. This was war fought not with shouting matches, but with evidence, oaths, and consequences. The low hum of expectation filled the courtroom as Judge Halverson nodded slightly, acknowledging the attorneys to proceed. The air was thick, not just with legal tension, but with years of unspoken words, broken promises, and fractured loyalty. Every single person in the room seemed to be aware that what was about to be said would set the tone for everything following. Miss Elena Reyes, counsel for Christine, Janelle, and Meri rose first. She moved with deliberate calm, her black suit crisp, her voice measured yet cutting. "Your Honor, members of the jury," she began. "This is not merely a dispute over property. This is a story about trust, trust that was built over decades and shattered with the stroke of a pen." She paused, letting her words hang in the air before continuing. "We will present evidence showing that my clients, women who dedicated their lives to a shared dream, were systematically excluded from decisions that directly impacted their futures. We will show land deeds quietly rewritten, funds rerouted without consent, and emails where promises were treated as inconveniences to be sidestepped. Most importantly, we will prove that their so-called consent was never informed, that it was obtained through manipulation, secrecy, and misplaced faith." Christine's eyes glistened, but remained fixed forward. Janelle tapped the edge of her binder, a steady rhythm, a grounding force. Meri closed her eyes briefly, exhaling years of silence. Then Mr. Dalton, Kody's attorney, stood, confident, polished. He spoke with the calm of a man who had rehearsed every word. "The plaintiffs will paint my client as a villain," he said, "but hard choices are not crimes. Managing finances, making timely decisions, these are the burdens of leadership. Mr. Brown carried those burdens when others could not." He turned toward the jury, voice firm. There was no deceit, no malicious intent. What existed was an evolving situation, one in which my client did everything he could to preserve a future for his family. Christine leaned slightly forward, whispering under her breath, "Preserve or control." Miss Reyes placed a steadying hand on her arm. The battle lines had been drawn. The courtroom, once merely a stage, was now an arena, and the fight for truth had officially begun. The lights in the courtroom dimmed slightly as a large screen descended from the ceiling. The quiet click of a projector echoed like a drumbeat, the sound of evidence about to speak louder than any witness ever could. Miss Reyes stepped forward, a thin folder of documents in hand, and approached the center of the room with the composure of someone who had been waiting for this moment for years. "Your Honor," she said, her tone crisp, Let's begin with Exhibit A, the original land deed for the property known as Coyote Ridge. The screen flickered, revealing a scanned image of a document signed nearly a decade earlier. Four names appeared neatly printed, representing Kody, Christine, Janelle, and Meri, equal co-owners of the land. The words joint tenancy and shared development rights glowed on the screen, promises made not just in ink, but in trust. This, Miss Reyes explained, pacing slowly before the jury, is the agreement my clients believed in. This is what they poured their money, their labor, and their dreams into. Then she flipped to the next slide, Exhibit B, and the atmosphere shifted like a sudden change in weather. Gasps rippled through the gallery. The new deed, recorded 3 years later, bore only one name, Coyote Ridge Management LLC, with Kody Brown listed as the sole managing member. Christine's breath caught. Janelle clenched her jaw. Meri stared down, as if the document itself was a betrayal she had been trying not to see. Notice the difference, Miss Reyes continued, her voice now sharper. The original reflects a family's shared future. The revision reflects one man's control. Kody shifted uneasily in his chair, avoiding Christine's piercing gaze. Dalton rose in protest. It's a standard restructuring, a common practice to protect assets and simplify management. Reyes countered without missing a beat. Then why were my clients never informed? Why were their names quietly erased from the record without so much as an email? The judge leaned forward slightly, brows furrowed. The jury whispered among themselves. It wasn't the ink that had betrayed them, it was the silence. And in the silence, the groundwork of trust had already begun to break down. The atmosphere in the courtroom grew heavy as Miss Reyes approached the table of evidence, clutching a pile of bank statements bound in clear folders. Each page seemed ordinary, columns of numbers, dates, and account details. But the story they told was anything but ordinary. With a nod from the judge, she began to lay them out one by one, each document projected on the courtroom screen like a trail of breadcrumbs leading deeper into the heart of betrayal. Your Honor, members of the jury, Reyes began, this is where the truth stops being emotional and becomes undeniable. This is money, and money, unlike people, doesn't lie. On the screen appeared a series of transactions from the Brown Family Trust account, a shared pool that had been built with contributions from Christine, Janelle, and Meri. Money meant for surveys, permits, and the dream of building homes side by side. But something wasn't right. Here she pointed to a transfer of $45,000, labeled construction advance. And here, another $32,000, temporary holding. And again, $58,000, future allocation. Reyes walked closer to the jury box. Each of these transactions occurred within a 6-month window, and every single one was transferred not into the joint family account, but into a separate holding company controlled solely by Mr. Kody Brown. The room shifted, whispers darting across the benches like sparks. Christine's hands gripped the edge of the table. Janelle leaned forward, her jaw locked. Even Meri's stoic composure cracked into a look of bitter realization. Mr. Dalton stood, attempting damage control. These were strategic moves, he argued. Short-term adjustments, common in real estate management. All funds were used for the project's benefit. Reyes didn't blink. Then why, she asked sharply, is there no record of these funds ever returning? Why is there no shared approval, no co-signature, no acknowledgement from the other stakeholders? The question floated out there like a verdict itself. Money leaves footprints, and these footprints led not to a dream of shared land, but to a paper trail of unilateral decisions and concealed control. What was once a family project now looked alarmingly like a private empire. The bailiff called her name, and a hush fell over the courtroom. Christine Brown rose slowly from her seat, every step toward the witness stand, heavy with the weight of years. Years of sacrifice, compromise, and faith in promises that now felt like illusion. She raised her right hand, swore the oath, and settled into the chair. For the first time that day, she looked directly at Kody. He glanced away. Miss Reyes approached gently, her tone softer now. Christine, could you tell the court why this land, Coyote Ridge, mattered so much to you? Christine inhaled deeply, her voice trembling but resolute. It wasn't just land, it was supposed to be our legacy, a place where our children could grow up side by side, where holidays were loud and messy, where we'd build homes close enough to wave from our porches. She paused, her eyes glistening. I believed in that dream. I believed in him. The attorney nodded. Were there specific promises made to you about your portion of the property? Christine nodded. Yes, Kody told me that the cottonwood grove on the west side, that would be my space. I even picked out where my kitchen window would face so I could watch the sunsets. It sounds small, but to me, it meant I was part of something bigger. And when did you discover your name was no longer on the deed? Reyes asked. Christine's breath caught. I found out from a clerk at the county office. I was there to ask about permits, and she looked at me like I was mistaken. She said, "Ma'am, you're not listed as an owner. You'll need permission to build." That's how I learned the dream I'd been building my life around wasn't mine at all. Across the room, Kody shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tightening. Mr. Dalton rose for cross-examination. You signed documents, didn't you? Transfers, releases, you put your name on them. Christine nodded, but her voice sharpened. I signed what I was told were tax forms. I signed because I trusted my husband. I signed because I believed we were on the same side. And in that one line, the courtroom understood. This wasn't a battle over paper. It was the story of a woman whose trust had been weaponized against her. The atmosphere shifted as Mr. Dalton rose from his chair, buttoning his jacket with deliberate precision. The defense attorney paced toward the witness stand, a faint, practiced smile on his face, the kind designed to unsettle without appearing aggressive. Christine braced herself, hands clasped tightly in her lap. She knew this part was coming. Mrs. Brown, Dalton began, his tone smooth and calculated. You testified that you signed documents without fully understanding them. Would you agree that you had the opportunity to read those documents before signing? Christine took a breath. I did read them, but the legal language was complex, and I was told by Kody, someone I trusted, that they were standard tax papers. I had no reason to doubt him. Dalton's eyebrows shot up. No reason, and still, you had doubts. In fact, I have in my hand a text message you sent to Janelle 6 weeks prior to signing. He raised a printed exhibit. I'm not sure I like how vague all of this is, but I guess we'll figure it out later. Doesn't that indicate you had reservations? Christine met his gaze. I had questions. Yes, but questions aren't the same as consent. I still believed the people around me were being honest. Dalton stepped closer, lowering his voice. Isn't it true, Mrs. Brown, that you were already contemplating leaving the marriage at that time? That this entire lawsuit is less about land and more about resentment? Christine's eyes flashed. I was contemplating my happiness because I felt invisible. But this lawsuit isn't about my marriage. It's about broken promises and decisions made behind closed doors. It's about being erased from something I helped build. A ripple moved through the courtroom gallery. Dalton tried one more angle. And yet, you stayed silent for months after discovering the change. Why? Christine's voice softened. Because I was hoping the man I trusted would make it right without me having to stand here today. But he didn't. The cross-examination was meant to weaken her. But Christine's truth only sharpened under pressure. Doubt could be twisted, loyalty questioned, but betrayal had its own undeniable weight. The courtroom grew silent once more as Janelle Brown made her way to the stand. Unlike Christine's emotional testimony, Janelle's presence carried a cool, calculated steadiness. She was known within the family as the numbers person, the one who balanced budgets, tracked expenses, and kept dreams financially grounded. Today, that meticulous nature would become her greatest weapon. She set a thick, well-worn blue binder on the witness table with a quiet thud, its pages dog-eared, tabs sticking out like battle flags. This, she said calmly, is 14 years of financial records. Every payment, every invoice, every contribution I made toward Coyote Ridge. Miss Reyes approached. Tell us what we're looking at, Mrs. Brown. These are title searches, soil tests, and land surveys. Payments I made myself. Here, she turned to a red-marked page, is a $12,500 advance to the architectural firm. And this page, she turned again, is a $9,000 payment for water access permits. All of these were made on the assumption that we were equal partners. The jury leaned forward as Janelle continued. I didn't invest blindly. I asked for updates, for copies of revised documents, for proof that everything remained equal. And each time I was told it was being handled, that I'd receive the paperwork soon. That soon never came. Mr. Dalton rose for cross-examination, his tone probing. Mrs. Brown, you're an experienced budgeter, correct? You understand that in real estate projects, funds often shift temporarily. Yes, Janelle replied evenly. I also understand that transparency is supposed to come with those shifts. I was not informed. My consent was assumed, not requested. Dalton pressed further. And isn't it true you continued to invest money even after receiving no documentation? Because I believed, she replied firmly, that family meant trust, that I wasn't just writing checks, I was building a future. Christine nodded silently from the plaintiff's table, pride and sorrow mingling in her eyes. The binder wasn't just evidence, it was a diary of dedication, every receipt a piece of faith. And as Janelle's calm testimony unfolded, the jury began to see that this wasn't negligence or misunderstanding. It was a betrayal written in dollars and cents. The courtroom doors seemed to hush as Meri Brown approached the witness stand, a presence both familiar and mysterious. Meri had always been the quiet one, the mediator, the lady who swallowed her feelings to keep the peace. She was different today, however. There was a different energy about her, the kind that brews after too many years of silence. As she raised her right hand and swore the oath, you could almost feel the weight of decades settling into that single moment. Miss Reyes stepped closer, her tone respectful. Meri, you've been part of this family since the beginning. Could you explain to the court your understanding of the land agreement? Meri nodded slowly, her voice calm but deliberate. From the start, we all agreed that Coyote Ridge would be a shared legacy. We knew there would be challenges, legal, financial, personal, but we made a promise. No one would be left out. Every decision would involve all of us. She paused, glancing briefly toward Kody, who stared fixedly at the table. I believed that promise. And did you ever consent to the property being reclassified under a single managing member? Reyes asked. Meri's jaw tightened. I consented to keeping our family together. I did not consent to being erased. Her voice didn't waver. If anything, it grew stronger. I was told the paperwork was routine, a procedural necessity. But what I wasn't told was that my name, and Christine's and Janelle's, had been quietly removed. She reached into her bag and pulled out a printed email, holding it up like a piece of evidence too painful to keep hidden. The subject line read, "Let's consolidate before anyone changes their mind." The courtroom gasped. Meri continued, "That was sent just days before the deed was changed. They knew we were having second thoughts, and instead of talking to us, they went around us." Kody shifted uncomfortably, but Meri wasn't done. "I kept quiet for too long, out of loyalty, out of love. But silence isn't consent, and I won't let my loyalty be used as a weapon against me." And with that, the quietest voice in the room became the loudest, a voice that had been ignored, dismissed, and underestimated. Until now, the courtroom felt different as Robyn Brown was sworn in, not tense like before, but heavy like the air just before a storm breaks. For years she had been a polarizing figure, both fiercely defended and deeply resented. Today, however, there was no fanfare, no confident smile. Her hands trembled as she adjusted the microphone, and her voice when she spoke was barely above a whisper. Miss Reyes approached slowly, her tone careful, knowing that what Robyn said next could shift the entire case. "Mrs. Brown," she began, "were you aware of the revised property documents before they were finalized?" Robyn's eyes darted briefly toward Kody, who stared ahead, expression frozen. "I reviewed them," she admitted, swallowing hard. "I was told they were necessary, that putting the land into an LLC was the only way to protect the family from potential tax issues." "And who told you that?" Reyes asked, though she already knew the answer. "Mrs. Kody," Robyn whispered. "He said it was temporary, that once everything was settled, we'd make sure everyone's names were included again." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Christine stared at the floor, jaw clenched. Janelle shook her head in disbelief. Meri looked heartbroken, not surprised, but wounded by the confirmation. "Did you question the decision at the time?" Reyes pressed gently. Robyn stalled. "I did, but I didn't push. I wanted to believe him. I thought he knew what he was doing, that he was doing it to protect us. And yes," her voice cracked, "I signed where he said to sign." "And did you gain anything from this alteration?" Reyes questioned, her tone slightly harder. Tears welled in Robyn's eyes. "Our mortgage was approved more easily.
The bank saw the land as more stable under one owner. It made our financial situation stronger. But I didn't realize it would make them feel like strangers to something they helped build. The courtroom was silent, except for Robyn's quiet sobbing. Even Kody's usually unshakable composure faltered for a moment. It wasn't a smoking gun, but it was close. Robyn's words revealed not just a plan, but a chain of trust manipulated and exploited. And now, the cracks in the foundation were too wide to ignore. The air in the courtroom shifted the moment Miss Reyes reached for a small, sleek USB drive and held it up like a final card in a high-stakes. "Your Honor," she said, her tone calm but heavy with purpose. "The plaintiffs would like to enter Exhibit J into evidence, an audio file obtained through lawful discovery during the pre-trial process." Judge Halverson adjusted her glasses. "Proceed." A silence fell over the courtroom as the clerk attached the device. The speakers crackled, and then, a voice, deep, unmistakable, and carrying a tone of command. "Kody Brown, put it in the LLC by Tuesday." The recording played, the words ringing through the courtroom. "If they can see it today, they'll delay. We can fix it later, once things calm down." The classroom burst into stunned whispers. Christine's mouth dropped open, her hand shooting to her lips. Janelle grumbled under her breath, her fingers clenching around her blue binder. Even Meri, normally calm, shook her head slowly, her face a picture of disbelief. Robyn sat rigid, eyes fixed in front of her, replaying the scene in her mind. Miss Reyes let the silence stretch before this recording was captured from a voicemail left on a shared family account. "As you can hear, Mr. Brown explicitly discusses the timing of transfer, not as a collaborative decision, but as a strategy to avoid objection." Mr. Dalton was on his feet in an instant. "Your Honor, this is taken wildly out of context. My client was speaking about administrative timing, not deception. It was a business decision, nothing more." Reyes didn't. "The jury will decide what those words mean. But if they see it now, though stall doesn't sound like transparent. It sounds like concealment."
Kody, visibly tense, leaned forward. "I wasn't trying to hide anything. I was trying to keep the project alive. I plan to fix it later." The judge raised a hand. "Mr. Brown, you will have your chance to testify. For now, the jury will consider this recording as part of the evidence." It wasn't words on tape. It was intent exposed, and in a courtroom, intent is what can turn an honest error into a calculated betrayal. When Kody Brown finally took the stand, the courtroom seemed to catch its breath. For hours, he had sat there, back stiff, lips pressed into a thin line, watching as years of decisions unraveled under testimony and evidence. Now, it was his turn to speak. The man who once called himself the leader of a plural family stepped forward, placed his hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. Whether he would or not was another question. Mr. Dalton began his direct examination. "Mr. Brown, can you explain to the court why you made the decision to consolidate the property into an LLC under your name?" Kody leaned forward, his voice steady but defensive. "Because someone had to. We were running out of time. The bank was threatening to pull financing if we didn't present a clear ownership structure. There were too many opinions, too many delays. I did what I believed was necessary to save the project." Dalton nodded. "And your intention was always to act in the best interest of the family?" "Of course," Kody replied quickly. "I wasn't trying to take anything from anyone. My plan was always to put their names back on once everything was finalized, but they were hesitating. If I had waited, the land deal could have collapsed completely." Then came Miss Reyes for cross-examination, and the tone changes instantly. "Mr. Brown," she began, "you said you did this to protect the family." "Which family?" "The one that no longer appears on the deed." Kody shifted uncomfortably. They were leaving. Christine had already moved on emotionally. Janelle was distant. Meri barely spoke to me. How was I supposed to plan a future around people who were halfway out the door? "So?" Reyes pressed. "Your solution was to make that decision for them, without their knowledge?" "It wasn't like that," Kody snapped. "I made a hard call. That's what leaders do." Reyes' voice sharpened. "Or what controllers do." The room was silent. Even Robyn looked away. Kody called it leadership. They called it betrayal. And as the jury watched his confidence falter under the weight of his own words, the line between those two words had never been thinner. The lights grew dim again as Miss Reyes walked towards the projector screen, with a serene but lethal accuracy. "Your Honor," she declared, "the plaintiffs would like to introduce Exhibit K, a collection of internal mail received by subpoena from Mr. Brown's business and personal accounts." The courtroom went silent as the first email went on the screen, 6 months prior to the deed transfer. Subject: Next steps, Coyote Ridge, from Kody Brown to Robyn Brown. We move ahead solo. It's the only way to secure the financing before spring. If we wait for the others to decide, the window closes. Christine stared at the screen, jaw trembling. Janelle crossed her arms tightly, as if holding herself together. Meri sat motionless, her face a mask, though her eyes betrayed the sting of validation. The betrayal she had suspected was now in writing. "Let's continue," Ray said, clicking to the next message, sent 2 weeks later. Subject: Plan B. Don't scare them with specifics. We'll let them know once the paperwork's in order. They'll thank us later when the project still exists. The jury shifted uncomfortably. It was something to listen to rumor, but to see Kody's words, calculated, purposeful, was another thing entirely. The courtroom had moved past he said she said. This was written intent. "Mr. Brown," Ray said tightly, turning to the defense table, "do you deny sending these emails?" Kody's face flushed slightly. "No, I wrote them, but they're being taken out of context. I wasn't trying to deceive anyone. I was trying to stop the entire project from falling apart." "By cutting out the people who helped build it?" Reyes asked, her voice slicing through the silence. Dalton scrambled back against this, presenting a spreadsheet of projected communal benefits, roads, utilities, property appreciation, all intended to demonstrate that Kody's actions were pragmatic rather than malicious. The damage was done. Intent rarely walks through the door so brazenly, but here it did, in the form of timestamps and subject lines. Words intended to comfort Robyn suddenly turned to describe manipulation, and what Kody would describe as strategy turned to appear much more like betrayal cloaked as leadership. The evidence was no longer emotional, it was implacable. By the time closing arguments began, the courtroom felt like a storm that had been building for weeks. All tension, no release. Every testimony, every document, every piece of evidence had led to this moment. The jurors leaned forward in their seats, pens poised, faces unreadable. Even the gallery had fallen silent. There was nothing left but the final words, the last chance to shape how history would remember this family's unraveling. Dalton rose first, buttoning his suit jacket with a deliberate calm. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice smooth and confident, "my client is not a criminal. He is a father, a husband, a man who was forced to make difficult choices in a complicated situation. Leadership," he said, pacing before the jury box, "is not always pretty. Sometimes it means making decisions that others may not understand. But those decisions were made to protect the family's future, not to harm it." He gestured toward Kody. "Was every action communicated perfectly?" "No. Were mistakes made?" "Certainly, but mistakes are not fraud. Misunderstandings are not betrayal. And I trust you will see that my client's intent was never malicious." There was a brief pause before Miss Reyes stood, holding no notes, just the weight of the truth she had built piece by piece. "This case is not about paperwork," she began, her voice steady but charged. "It's about promises. It's about trust. It's about a family that built something together, only to watch one person quietly rewrite the rules in his favor." She walked slowly before the jury, her words deliberate. "You've heard the recordings, you've read the emails, you've seen the bank transfers. None of that is an accident. None of it is leadership. It's control. It's exclusion. It's betrayal." Christine's eyes welled up as Reyes continued. "They aren't asking you for vengeance. They're asking for recognition, that their contributions, their sacrifices, and their trust matter. That no one, no matter how powerful, should get to erase others from the story they helped write." It was no longer just a courtroom battle. It was a plea for dignity, justice, and truth. A final reckoning for a family that had been fractured in silence. The air in the courtroom was so still it felt heavy. Every seat was filled, every eye fixed on the door to the jury room. Hours had gone by since the 12 jurors had filed out to deliberate, yet hadn't eased the tension. If anything, it had grown sharper with each tick of the clock. Christine sat between Janelle and Meri, whose hands would occasionally touch for comfort. Robyn stared down at her lap, and twisted into knots a tissue she'd balled up. And Kody stared at the floor, as if the polished wood might offer an escape from what was coming. At last, the bailiff stepped forward. "All rise," he called. The jury was returning. The room rose as the jurors filed in, each wearing the kind of grave, unreadable expression that makes time slow down. Judge Halverson nodded to the foreperson. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor." "Read it, please." The foreperson slowly unfolded the sheet of paper, her voice firm and measured. "On the issue of misrepresentation affecting equitable interest, we rule in favor of the plaintiffs." A subdued gasp swept through the courtroom. Christine gripped Janelle's hand, her eyes brimming with tears she refused to shed. Meri closed her eyes and breathed softly. At last, the foreperson continued. "We hereby order that the title to the Coyote Ridge property should be reformed to reflect all original parties as equal co-owners. We hereby also order a full accounting of all financial transfers conducted regarding this property and reimbursement of out-of-pocket expenses incurred by plaintiffs. We hereby do not find relevant evidence supporting this claim for criminal fraud." The words were hanging in the air like a thunderclap. Robyn was pressed her hands to her mouth, her shoulders shaking. Kody's face was too still for Robyn's comfort. That and his best masquerade of a stunned and humiliated expression. He hadn't lost everything, but he had lost control. Judge Halverson looked over her glasses. "This court cannot untangle every emotional thread, but it can correct the legal ones. That is what we have done here today." And just like that, years of secrecy unraveled in a single moment. The law had spoken. Not with vengeance, but with justice. And justice at long last belonged to those who had been written out of their own story. The courthouse steps were bathed in soft afternoon light, as the doors swung open and the Brown family slowly emerged, not as a united clan, but as fragments of what they once were. Yet there was something profoundly different in the air now. For the first time in years, the story was no longer being written in whispers or buried beneath manipulation. It was being voiced out by the law, by the truth, and by the people who had refused to keep quiet. Christine was the first to step before the waiting microphones. Her voice, though trembling, carried the steadiness of a woman who had reclaimed her power. "This was never about revenge," she told the crowd. "It was about recognition, about making sure that our contributions, our sacrifices, and our voices mattered. Today, the court affirmed that they do." Beside her, Janelle held the iconic blue binder to her chest, like a badge of honor. "This," she said, lifting it slightly, "is 14 years of work. Every dollar, every effort, every late-night decision. I wasn't fighting for land. I was fighting for accountability, and we finally got it." Meri, who had been largely silent throughout the trial, spoke with surprising force. "When love is changing, integrity shouldn't," she stated matter-of-factly. "We created something together, and that should be recognized, regardless of how broken things get." Across the plaza, Kody stood apart, Robyn at his side. He didn't approach the microphones. His shoulders sagged, his eyes distant, the look of a man forced to confront the consequences of choices he could no longer justify. Robyn's hand rested gently on his arm, but even her touch couldn't erase the truth that now defined them. Ultimately, the case was never about land or ownership. It was about vows, the ones honored, the ones dishonored, and the ones worth struggling to hold on to. Justice did far more than redistribute property that day. It rewrote a story. It demonstrated that betrayal could be met, silence could speak, and that even the most broken families could still cut meaning from the ruins of their history. The gavel had fallen. The story was over. And yet, for everyone involved, it was only the beginning.